Hello, everyone. Welcome to the studio. My name is Chris, and I'm excited to show you around today.
The trailer burned so fast, Caleb barely had time to grab his sister's hand before the whole thing lit up the night like a flare. This story is about what people can still build after loss, and how the ones the world overlooks are sometimes the very ones who keep hope alive. By the time the fire department's old engine rattled up to the gravel lot outside Mercy Ridge, there was almost nothing left to save. Just a black frame, a sagging strip of melted siding. Two lawn chairs collapsed into the dirt, and the smell, sharp, bitter, final, the kind that sticks in your throat and makes everything feel more real than you want it to. Caleb Turner stood barefoot in the dead summer grass, his chest heaving, one arm wrapped tight around his little sister. Mia was 13, too old to cry like a child, too young to stand there watching her whole life turn to smoke without shaking. She held on to the sleeve of Caleb's t-shirt so hard her knuckles had gone white. Neither of them said much. They did not need to. Their mother had been gone for 11 months. Their father had disappeared long before that, leaving behind a rusted toolbox, a pile of unpaid bills, and the kind of silence that settles into a family and never fully leaves. That trailer had not been much. A leaking roof, a broken kitchen drawer, a window patched with cardboard and duct tape, but it had been theirs. And now it was gone. A volunteer firefighter came over with a blanket that smelled like engine oil and soap. Caleb thanked him, even though the night was so hot the blanket felt useless. Across the road, a few neighbors stood with their arms folded, watching the last orange glow die under the spray of water and foam. Some looked sorry, some looked tired, some had the hard, worn faces of people who had their own troubles and knew better than to promise help they could not afford to give. That was small-town America too. Not cruelty, exactly. Just people stretched thin. Mercy Ridge had been hurting for years. The feed store on Main had closed in the spring. The diner only opened 4 days a week now. Lawns had gone yellow under a brutal July sun, and the pond behind the baseball field had shrunk to a muddy ring. Everybody talked about the drought. Everybody talked about rising bills. Everybody talked about leaving. Nobody ever really left. Caleb looked down at Mia. Ash had landed in her hair. There was soot on her cheek. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded too fast. That meant no. He knew that already. "What do we do now?" she whispered. It was the kind of question that could break a person if they let it sit too long. Caleb swallowed hard and looked back at the smoking shell of the trailer. Inside that ruin were their school papers, their mom's church Bible, a coffee can with $43 in it, Mia's sketchbook, and the last birthday card their mother had ever signed. For one dangerous second, he felt something close to panic claw up his throat. Not fear, something worse. Failure. He was 19 years old, standing in a pair of borrowed gym shorts and one sock, with no house, no savings, no plan, and a sister who still looked at him like he might somehow know what came next. So he did the only thing an older brother can do when life backs him into a corner. He lied a little. "We'll figure it out," he said. Mia looked up at him, searching his face, trying to decide if that was true. Then she gave a small nod. Out past the gravel road, beyond the dry weeds in the church parking lot, Caleb's eyes drifted toward the ridge above town. That was when he saw it. Tall against the dark sky, rust-stained, silent. The old abandoned water tower on Boone Hill. Most folks in Mercy Ridge had forgotten it was even there. But in that moment, with the heat of the fire still pressing against his skin and everything he owned turned to ash, Caleb could not stop staring at it. Because sometimes when a life falls apart in one night, the next chapter begins with the one thing everybody else stopped seeing years ago. By sunrise, the fire had cooled into a damp black skeleton. What had been home was now a warped frame, a scorched mattress spring, and a patch of earth that smelled like wet ash and burned plastic. Caleb did not let Mia look too long. He picked through what little he could with a bent rake one of the firefighters left behind, hoping for anything. A zipper, a photo corner, some scrap of life that had not been eaten whole. But the heat had been merciless. Their mother's Bible was gone. The coffee can was gone. Mia's sketchbook was gone. Everything important seemed to have turned into the same gray dust. By mid-morning, the July sun was already hard and punishing. A social worker from the county came by in a faded sedan and spoke in the careful, practiced voice people use when they are trying not to sound helpless. She offered temporary placement, separate beds, separate addresses, separate paperwork. Mia heard enough to understand. "No," she said before Caleb even answered. The woman glanced between them, Mia, honey, this would only be until things settle down. Mia folded her arms tight across her chest. Her face was pale under the soot, but her voice came out steady. I'm not going anywhere without my brother. Caleb felt that line land in him like both a gift and a weight. He wanted to be relieved. Instead, he felt terrified. Because loyalty sounds beautiful, right up until someone trusts you with everything they have left. By noon, they had 2 bottles of warm water, a grocery sack of donated clothes from the church pantry, and nowhere to go. Mercy Ridge was the kind of place where people would hand you a casserole, pray over you in a parking lot, and still have no extra room in the house. Not because they were cold, just because most of them were one missed paycheck away from needing help themselves. Pastor Levi Grant found them sitting on the curb behind the little brick church off Miller Road. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a white shirt already sticking to his back in the heat. He brought turkey sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and a paper bag with apples, crackers, and 2 small cartons of milk. You 2 eatin'? He asked. Caleb nodded out of reflex. Mia said, not really. Levi gave the faintest smile, like he appreciated honesty more than pride. Well, he said, handing over the bag, today seems like a good day to start. They ate in silence under the thin shade of a sycamore tree. The turkey was dry. The milk was almost warm. It still tasted like the first decent thing in the world. Pastor Levy did not press them with too many questions. He simply sat on the curb beside them and looked out toward town, where heat shimmered above the road and every yard looked tired. After a while, Caleb said, you know anybody with a room to rent cheap? Levi exhaled through his nose. Cheap's gotten harder to find than rain. That was the truth of Mercy Ridge now. The creek beds were low. The grass had gone brittle. Folks kept talking about the reservoir like saying its name enough times might somehow fill it back up. Then Mia, still holding half an apple in one hand, glanced toward the ridge beyond town. What about the water tower? She asked. Levi turned his head. For a second, nobody said anything. The old Boone Hill water tower rose above the tree line like a forgotten watchman. Rusted, fenced off, and useless for as long as most people could remember. Caleb followed her gaze. He had seen it the night before through smoke and heat and shock. Now in daylight, it looked even sadder. Tall legs of flaking steel, a round tank streaked brown-orange with rust, dry weeds around the base, a service road half swallowed by brush. You can't live in that. Levi said gently. Mia shrugged. Can't live on the curb either. Levi let out a quiet breath at that. He looked at Caleb. Tower's been abandoned near 20 years. Used to feed the east side before the county switched systems. Harold Boone took care of it back when it mattered. Harold Boone? On? Caleb asked. Levi nodded. Maintenance man, stubborn old bird, knew every pipe in town like it was family. People said he cared more about water pressure than people's feelings. Mia wiped her fingers on a napkin. What happened to him? Passed on about 6 years back. Heart trouble. Caleb looked again at the tower. Something about it pulled at him. Maybe because it was still standing when other things had failed. Maybe because it looked forgotten in a way he understood. Is it locked? He asked. Levi studied him carefully now, seeing more than the question. It ought to be, he said. Whether it still is, I couldn't tell you. That afternoon, with the sun blazing white overhead and their future narrowed down to what they could carry in one paper sack, Caleb and Mia walked the cracked service road up Boone Hill. Cicadas screamed in the trees. Dust rose around their shoes. The whole town seemed to sag behind them in the heat. When they reached the chain-link fence, Caleb found one side bowed inward where the posts had shifted. Not wide open, but open enough. He looked at Mia. She looked back at him, sweat on her brow, jaw set, scared but willing. Neither of them said, turn back. Caleb pushed the fence aside and stepped through first. At the base of the tower, hidden behind a curtain of weeds and shadow, he saw something that made him stop cold. A narrow metal service door, and fresh scrape marks in the dirt beneath it. Like someone had stood there not all that long ago. Caleb stood still for a second, one hand on the bent section of fence, his eyes fixed on the dirt beneath the service door. The scrape marks were real, not old storm damage, not random animal tracks, fresh. Mia stepped up beside him, breathing hard from the climb. What is it? He pointed down. She narrowed her eyes, then looked back at the door. It was narrow, painted industrial gray once upon a time, now blistered by sun and streaked with rust. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, but the metal around it looked cleaner than the rest, like somebody had touched it recently. That's weird, she said. Yeah, Caleb answered quietly. He moved closer. The weeds around the base of the tower had grown wild, but not untouched. There was a thin path pressed into them. Easy to miss unless you were looking for it. The kind of path made by boots, not deer. Mia shifted the paper sack from one hand to the other. "You think somebody's living here?" Caleb did not answer right away. He was thinking about all the reasons that could be bad. A drifter, a squatter with a temper, someone guarding stolen equipment. But he was also thinking about the flat curb behind the church, the county social worker, the look on Mia's face when she said she was not leaving him. He reached for the lock. It looked solid, old but solid. Then he noticed the hasp itself had pulled half loose from the frame. One hard tug and the whole thing shifted with a dull, metallic groan. Mia took a half step back. "Caleb, I know." He pulled again. The screws gave way with a sharp pop. The padlock stayed attached to the latch, useless now, and the door cracked inward 2 inches, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled like hot dust, machine oil, and old concrete. The inside was dark, cooler than the outside, but only just. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb said, "Stay behind me." Mia gave him a look that meant she hated that sentence on principle. But this time she obeyed. He pushed the door wider. A narrow service room opened inside the base of the tower. There were metal shelves bolted to the wall, an old electrical panel, lengths of coiled hose, and a workbench covered in grime. Sunlight slanted in through a small vent high above, catching dust in the air. Nothing fancy, nothing magical, just an old utility space that had been forgotten by almost everybody. But not all the way forgotten. There was a lantern on the bench, a newer one, not fresh from the store, but not 20 years old either. And beside it sat 3-gallon jugs of water, full. Mia saw them at the same time he did. "Oh my God!" Caleb crossed the room fast and grabbed one, turning it in his hands like he expected it to disappear. The plastic was warm from the heat, but sealed, real, clean. He stared at it, then at the lantern, then at the small pile of folded canvas in the corner. This was no random junk room. Somebody had been using this place. Not often, maybe. Not enough to live here every day, but enough to leave things that mattered. Mia stepped farther in, her voice quieter now. "We should go." Caleb looked at her. "You want to go back down there?" "No," she swallowed. "I just don't want us getting in trouble with the wrong person." That landed because he knew she was right. Still, his eyes kept moving across the room. On the back wall was an old bulletin board with brittle maps pinned beneath yellowed plastic. Most were too faded to read from here. Beneath them sat a dented steel filing cabinet, one drawer hanging slightly open. He moved toward it carefully. "Caleb, just 1 minute." He pulled the drawer open the rest of the way. Inside were maintenance logs, weather notes, pressure charts, and a thick black binder swollen from humidity. On the front, written in block letters with a silver paint marker, were the words, "Boone Hill Auxiliary System, Emergency Use Only." Mia came up beside him. They both stared at it. "Auxiliary system?" she asked. Caleb lifted the binder out and wiped a layer of dust from the cover with his forearm. The first pages were filled with diagrams, hand-drawn maps of pipe routes, pump lines, shut-off valves, and something marked in red ink over and over again. "Lower spring feed." He turned another page. There were notes in tight, slanted handwriting. Not neat, not polished, but urgent. If County Line ever fails, East Ridge can still pull water through Boone Line with manual prime and lower valve release. Most people think it's dead. It isn't. Caleb read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Mia leaned closer. "What does that mean?" "It means..." He stopped because he did not want to say it too soon and sound foolish. "It means this tower might not be as dead as everybody thinks." Outside, the cicadas screamed in the heat. Inside, the room felt strangely still. Caleb flipped deeper into the binder and found a page covered in dates from old drought years, with short notes beside each one: pressure drop, intake strain, manual flush, emergency ration flow. At the bottom of one page was a line written darker than the rest, pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper. "If this town ever gets desperate enough, somebody needs to remember the spring under the east slab." Mia looked up at him, her face pale and intent. "Caleb," he knew. He felt it too. That strange, trembling shift between hopelessness and possibility. Not certainty, not yet, but the first real possibility they had seen since the trailer burned. Then, from somewhere above them inside the tower, there came a sudden metallic thud. Both of them froze. Mia grabbed his arm so fast her nails bit through his sleeve. The sound came again, heavy, slow, like something or someone moving overhead. The sound came again. Not the loose rattle of old metal in the wind. Not the harmless settling noise of a dead structure baking under the July sun. This was heavier than that. Measured, deliberate, like boots shifting weight on steel somewhere above their heads. Mia's fingers tightened around Caleb's arm. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice thin now. "Someone's up there." He did not answer right away, because if he said yes, it would make it real. He slowly closed the binder and set it on the workbench without taking his eyes off the narrow stairwell, bolted to the inside wall of the tower. It rose in a tight spiral through shadow, disappearing into the dimness above. The air in the room felt different now, closer, charged. Caleb reached for the lantern on the bench. It was heavier than he expected. He clicked the switch. Nothing. Dead battery. Of course. Another sound drifted down. A scrape. Then silence again. Mia stepped closer behind him. "We need to go." Every protective instinct in him agreed, but something else held him there. It was not bravery. Not really. It was the sick, stubborn knowledge that if they walked away now, they would be walking back to nothing. Back to the curb, the church lot, the county office, the quiet process of being separated one polite form at a time. He swallowed. "Stay here," he said softly. Mia almost looked offended. "Absolutely not." He might have smiled on another day. Not this one. Before either of them could move, a voice came down from the stairwell. "You break into county property often? Or is today special?" It was a woman's voice. Older. Dry as sun-bleached wood. Not frightened. Not angry either. Just tired. And sharp enough to cut through the room. A moment later, she appeared on the landing halfway down the stairs. She was probably in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, with silver hair pulled back under a faded ball cap, and a face lined by sun, years, in plain speaking. She wore work gloves, dusty jeans, and a denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up. In one hand, she held a wrench the size of a small hammer. Mia exhaled first. Not because the woman looked safe, because she looked human. Caleb lifted one hand, careful, respectful. "We weren't trying to steal anything." The woman's eyes went from him to Mia, then to the paper sack, then back to the broken latch on the door. "Mm-hmm," she said. "And I suppose that lock broke itself." Caleb did not lie. "No, ma'am." That seemed to earn him half a point. She came down the rest of the stairs slowly, joints stiff but steady, and stopped a few feet away. Up close, she smelled faintly of machine grease, sunscreen, and the outside heat. "You got names?" "Caleb." "Mia." The woman nodded once. "I'm Eileen Brooks." Mia looked at her. "You live here?" Eileen snorted softly. "Lord, no. I have enough sense not to sleep inside a rusted water tower in July." Then after a beat, she added, "But I do come up here most weeks." Her gaze shifted to the binder on the bench. "And now I'd like to know why two kids who smell like smoke and bad luck are reading Harold Boone's notes." Caleb felt his face tighten. He did not know why, but something in the way she said that name made honesty feel easier than pretending. "Our trailer burned down last night," he said. "We don't have anywhere else." The room went still. Eileen's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The edge in her face softened, just a little. Her eyes moved to Mia again, taking in the oversized donated t-shirt, the ash still caught around her hairline, the exhaustion she was trying hard to hide. "When?" Eileen asked. "About midnight." Eileen set the wrench down on the bench. "I heard the sirens from town." That was all she said for a second. Then she reached for one of the water jugs, cracked the seal, and handed it to Mia first. Mia looked at Caleb. He gave the smallest nod. She drank. Not greedily, just the way a person drinks when they have spent too many hours pretending they are fine. Eileen leaned one hip against the bench and folded her arms. "Harold Boone was my brother." That changed the room. Caleb looked at the maps again. The notes, the careful, relentless records. Suddenly, the tower did not feel abandoned. It felt watched over. "Pastor Levi mentioned him," Caleb said. "Said he used to run the East Side Water." "He did more than run it," Eileen replied. "He kept half this town from falling apart longer than anybody ever knew." Folks laughed at him near the end. Said he was obsessed. Said the county system made the old lines useless. She glanced up toward the tank above them. Harold never believed in depending on one system for anything. Mia wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "He wrote that the spring under the east slab could still work." At that, Eileen looked at her sharply, then at Caleb. "So you read far enough to understand what you found?" "Not all of it," Caleb admitted. "Just enough to know this place might still matter." Eileen was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the heat pressed against the tower walls. Somewhere down the hill, a dog barked once and fell silent again. Finally, Eileen sighed. "You two picked one hell of a week to stumble in here," Caleb frowned. "What does that mean?" She pushed away from the bench, walked to the bulletin board, and tapped a folded county notice pinned beneath one of Harold's old maps. Stage 4 water restrictions. Emergency reserves critically low. Voluntary hauling stations may open within 72 hours. Caleb read it once. Then again, his stomach dropped. Eileen looked at him with the grave, unsentimental face of someone too old to decorate bad news. "The reservoir's nearly done," she said. "Mercy Ridge is about 3 days away from learning just how thirsty a town can get." She let that sit. Then she looked down at Harold's binder in Caleb's hands. "And if my brother was right," she said quietly, "this old tower may be the only thing up on this hill that still remembers where the water is." 3 days later, Mercy Ridge ran out of time. By dawn, the gas station had posted handwritten signs on the pumps and front windows. "No public water. Limit 2 bottles per family." At the diner, coffee was served in paper cups because nobody wanted to waste dishwater. At the elementary school, bathrooms were locked except for emergencies. And by noon, folks were standing in the heat with empty coolers, plastic jugs, stock tanks, mop buckets, anything that could hold water, staring down roads where no county truck had arrived. Up on Boone Hill, the work had already begun. Caleb's hands were blistered raw, Mia's cheeks were pink from heat and sun, but her eyes had changed. There was still fear in them, but now there was focus too. She sat cross-legged on the concrete floor with Harold Boone's binder spread across her lap, reading each page twice, sometimes 3 times, calling out notes in a voice that had grown steadier with every hour. "Lower spring feed first, then manual prime. Don't open the release too fast or it'll choke the line. East slab valve before pressure arm." Eileen Brooks moved with the calm, flinty confidence of somebody who had spent half a lifetime around machines, stubborn men, and things that only worked if you respected them. Pastor Levi brought work gloves, sandwiches, and every extra jug he could gather from the church. Noah Bennett came flying up the hill on his bike with wire, tools, and a borrowed socket set, acting like he was only there to help for an hour, then staying all day. Even Sheriff Dana Ruiz showed up before sunset. At first, she stood with her hands on her hips, looking at the busted slab, the open service room, the old lines Caleb and Eileen had exposed. Then she looked down the hill at the town, at the people waiting, at the mothers fanning red-faced children in pickup trucks, at old men sitting silent on tailgates with empty barrels in the bed. And something in her face shifted. "What do you need?" she asked. That was the moment Caleb knew this had become bigger than survival. It was no longer about finding a place for himself and Mia to sleep. It was about whether one forgotten hill, one rusted tower, one dead man's notes, and a handful of exhausted people could keep a town from breaking. The first try failed. The line coughed, shuddered, spat out mud and air. Noah swore under his breath. Mia shut her eyes. Caleb gripped the manual pump so hard his shoulders shook. For one crushing second, it felt like hope was about to humiliate them in front of everybody. Then Eileen barked, "Again!" So they tried again. Caleb pumped. Noah held the coupling in place. Sheriff Ruiz leaned her weight into the pressure arm. Mia read the sequence back one more time, her voice thin but clear. And then a tremor moved through the pipe, a deep, hollow shudder, a groan from somewhere under the slab, followed by one hard burst of brown water, then another, and then a clean, steady stream pouring into the holding tank below. Nobody cheered right away. Not at first. People just stared, like they could not trust what they were seeing. Then a woman near the fence started crying. A little boy laughed out loud. Pastor Levi pulled off his cap and pressed it to his chest. And all at once, the whole hill seemed to exhale. By that evening, Boone Hill was no longer an abandoned tower. It was the heart of Mercy Ridge. Neighbors who had once passed Caleb without seeing him were now hauling lumber, patching pipes, setting up shade tarps, and handing Mia sandwiches like she belonged to all of them. For the first time since the trailer burned, Caleb did not feel like a boy trying to outrun disaster. He felt rooted, needed, seen. A week later, someone hung a hand-painted sign near the fence. Boone Hill Community Waterhouse. Mia stood under it with wind in her hair and dust on her sneakers, smiling in that quiet, hard-earned way people smile when life finally gives them one small piece of mercy back. And Caleb looked at the tower, old, scarred, still standing, and understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. Sometimes the world writes people off too soon. Sometimes it does the same thing to places. But every now and then, the broken thing everybody forgot turns out to be the very thing that saves them. So let me ask you, If you had been in Caleb's place, would you have walked away from that tower or climbed the hill anyway? And do you believe the people life overlooks often carry the strongest kind of courage? If this story moved you, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and come back for the next story. Because sometimes hope shows up looking like rust, dust, and one last chance.